My name is Amber, and I never thought I'd be the one to cut ties with my family. But life has a way of showing you who people really are, especially during what should be the happiest moments. I met James 3 years ago at a tech conference where I was working as an event coordinator. He was different from the guys I usually dated, quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly intelligent. While I'd always been the life of the party like the rest of my family, there was something about his calm demeanor that drew me in. He worked as a senior programmer at a major tech company, and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his projects made me fall for him instantly. "You're nothing alike," my younger sister Rachel kept telling me when we started dating. "He barely says 2 words at family dinners." She was 5 years younger than me, but always acted like she knew everything about relationships. Our parents, Tom and Linda, weren't much better. "Honey, are you sure about him?" Mom would ask whenever James left the room. "He seems so distant." I tried explaining countless times that James wasn't distant, he was just introverted. He preferred small gatherings to large parties, meaningful conversations to small talk. But my family never tried to understand. They saw his quietness as arrogance, his introversion as a personal slight against them. Despite their disapproval, James and I got married a year ago. It was a small ceremony, just the way we both wanted it. My family attended but spent most of the time making passive-aggressive comments about how different everything was from traditional family weddings. "I don't understand why they can't accept you for who you are," I said to James one evening after another tense family dinner. He just smiled that gentle smile of his and shrugged. "Not everyone needs to understand me, Amber. As long as you do." That's what I loved about him, his ability to stay above the drama, to not let other people's opinions affect him. But things were about to get much worse, and even his calm demeanor would be tested. It started with a phone call from Mom last weekend. "Amber, dear, we're having a family dinner next Saturday. Just you, though, we know James doesn't enjoy these gatherings." I felt my blood pressure rising. "What do you mean, just me?" "Well," Mom hesitated, her voice trailing off. "We're having some relatives over, and you know how James is with crowds. We thought it would be better if..." "If what, Mom?" "If my husband stayed home while I pretended to be single at family gatherings?" "Sorry, Mom, but I'm not coming without my husband. That's not how marriage works." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger. When I told James about it later, he just laughed. Everything changed when Rachel called me one sunny morning. Her voice was bubbling with excitement, and I could practically feel her jumping up and down through the phone. "Amber, oh my God, you won't believe it. Mark proposed last night," she squealed. My heart leaped with genuine joy. Despite our differences, I loved my sister, and I knew how much she cared about Mark. They'd been dating for over 2 years, and he seemed like a good guy, a high school teacher who shared Rachel's outgoing personality and love for social gatherings. "That's amazing, Rachel. I'm so happy for you," I said, already grabbing my car keys. "Are you at Mom and Dad's?" "Yes. Come over right now. We're starting to plan everything." 20 minutes later, I was walking into my parents' familiar living room. Rachel immediately ran to hug me, her engagement ring catching the light. Mom and Dad were beaming, and Mark stood nearby, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed. "Show me the ring," I demanded, and Rachel proudly displayed the modest but beautiful diamond. We spent the next hour going through wedding magazines and discussing dates. Then Mom's expression turned serious. "The only issue is, well, we're a bit tight on money right now," she said, looking uncomfortable. "With Dad's recent medical bills and everything." I watched Rachel's face fall slightly, though she tried to hide it. Without hesitation, I heard myself say, "I'll give you $10,000 for the wedding." Rachel launched herself at me, nearly knocking me over with her hug. "Oh my God, Amber. Thank you, thank you, thank you." Even Mom and Dad looked impressed. "That's incredibly generous of you, honey," Mom said, actually sounding sincere for once. Later that evening, I told James about everything while we were having dinner in our kitchen. His response surprised me. I have an idea, he said, putting down his fork. What if we also get them tickets to the Maldives for their honeymoon? As a surprise gift at the wedding? I stared at him, dumbfounded. The Maldives? But that would cost about $20,000, he finished. I know. I'll use my personal savings. I've been thinking about what you said, about building bridges with your family. Maybe this could help them see me differently. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was the man my family thought was cold and arrogant, offering to spend his own savings to give my sister her dream honeymoon. Are you sure? I asked, still stunned by his generosity. He smiled and pulled me into a hug. Absolutely. But let's keep it a secret until the wedding. It'll make it more special. That night, as I lay in bed thinking about everything, I felt hopeful for the first time in ages. Maybe this would finally help my family see James for who he really was, not the antisocial person they'd labeled him as, but the incredibly thoughtful, generous man I'd fallen in love with. The months leading up to Rachel's wedding flew by in a whirlwind of planning and preparations. Every weekend seemed to bring a new decision to make, and Rachel wanted my opinion on everything. I was touched that she valued my input. What do you think about this venue? Rachel asked one Saturday, showing me pictures of an elegant converted warehouse. It's smaller than the country club Mom suggested, but I think it has more character. I love it, I said honestly. Plus, it'll probably cost half as much. Rachel nodded, chewing her lip. That's what I was thinking. Mark and I want to keep things simple, no more than 50 guests. We're both trying to be practical about money. I admired her approach. Unlike some brides who went crazy with expensive demands, Rachel was being surprisingly sensible. We spent hours comparing flower arrangements, tasting different menu options, and visiting dress shops, always with an eye on the budget. You don't think it's too plain? She asked, twirling in a sleek, minimalist wedding dress that cost a fraction of what Mom had expected her to spend. It's perfect, I assured her. Sometimes less is more. Every time we made another decision or checked another item off the list, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about the surprise waiting for them. James would occasionally ask how the planning was going, and I'd catch him grinning when I mentioned Rachel's offhand comments about wanting to travel someday. I can't wait to see their faces, he said one evening. Have you looked at the resort photos I sent you? The overwater bungalow is going to blow their minds. His enthusiasm made me fall in love with him all over again. Here was my antisocial husband, genuinely excited about giving my sister and her fiancé the honeymoon of their dreams. But as the wedding date grew closer, something started nagging at me. 2 weeks before the big day, I realized what it was: we still hadn't received our invitation. At first, I tried to brush it off. Rachel had been so busy with preparations, and she'd involved me in every detail of the planning. Surely it was just an oversight? Still, something felt off. James and I had our outfits ready, we'd arranged time off work, and we'd been actively involved in all the planning, but we didn't have an actual invitation. After a particularly restless night thinking about it, I decided to stop by my parents' house after work to ask Rachel directly. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw both my parents' cars and Rachel's beat-up Honda. Perfect, everyone would be there. I grabbed my purse and headed to the front door, still telling myself I was probably worried about nothing. After all, we'd been instrumental in planning this whole wedding. There had to be a simple explanation for the missing invitation. I walked into my parents' living room, trying to keep my voice casual. Hey, Rachel, I wanted to ask you something. James and I haven't received our invitation yet. I'm sure it just got lost in the mail or something. Rachel shifted uncomfortably on the couch, glancing at our parents before answering. Oh, actually, I wanted to give it to you in person. She reached into her purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, handing it to me with what I now recognize was forced enthusiasm. Here you go. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened it. The invitation was beautiful, elegant script on thick paper, exactly the style we'd picked out together. but as I read the words, my stomach dropped. There was only one name on it, mine. "Rachel," I said slowly, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, "why isn't James's name on this?" She straightened up, and I saw something change in her expression. Gone was the hesitation, replaced by a defiant look I'd seen many times when we were kids, and she was about to do something she knew was wrong. "Well," she said, glancing at our parents again for support, "we decided to keep the guest list really tight. You know, only the absolute closest people." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Closest people? James is my husband. He's your brother-in-law." "Come on, Amber," Rachel said, rolling her eyes. "We all know he's not really family. He never tries to be part of anything." I turned to our parents, expecting, hoping, they would say something to correct this insanity. But Mom just sat there nodding, while Dad wouldn't even meet my eyes. "We support Rachel's decision," Mom said firmly. "Your husband doesn't enjoy these kinds of events anyway. He always looks so miserable at family gatherings." "That's not true," I protested, but Dad cut me off. "Be reasonable, Amber. He'll just sit there with that sad face of his the whole time, making everyone uncomfortable. Besides," he added, as if this was the clincher, "this way Rachel can save some money on the catering." "Save money?" I repeated incredulously. "You're talking about excluding my husband to save money on a plate of food?" "It's my wedding," Rachel said, crossing her arms. "I get to decide who comes, and I don't want him there bringing down the mood. He can stay home and code or whatever it is he does." I stood there, looking at these three people who I'd known my whole life, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. How could they sit there and so casually exclude my husband, act like he was some random acquaintance rather than family? The worst part was seeing how rehearsed it all seemed. They'd clearly discussed this before, prepared their arguments, agreed among themselves that this was perfectly reasonable. While my husband had been spending his savings on their dream honeymoon, they'd been plotting to exclude him. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want to exclude my husband to save money on the wedding that I gave you $10,000 for? $10,000 that I handed over without any conditions or expectations?" Rachel's smug expression faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Well, that was different. You're my sister. And James is your brother-in-law." I cut her off. "But you know what's really ironic about all this? James has spent the last 3 months planning a surprise for you. He was going to give you and Mark an all-expenses-paid honeymoon trip to the Maldives. $20,000 worth of luxury resort, overwater bungalow, first-class flights, everything." The room went dead silent. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's jaw dropped. Rachel's face went through a rapid series of expressions: disbelief, shock, and then something that made my stomach turn: calculation. "The Maldives?" Rachel's voice had completely changed, becoming sweet and conciliatory. "Oh my God, Amber, I was just kidding about the invitation thing. Of course James is invited. Here, let me fix the card right now." She reached for her purse, pulling out a pen. I stepped back, physically recoiling from her sudden change in attitude. "Don't bother. The trip is cancelled." "What? No." Rachel jumped up. "Come on, I said I was joking. Don't be so sensitive." "Honey," Mom stepped in, her voice honey-sweet, "your sister was just stressed about the wedding planning. You know how brides can be. Of course we want James there." Dad nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, he's family." I looked at their faces, faces I'd known and loved my whole life, and felt nothing but disgust. 5 minutes ago, they'd been united in excluding my husband. Now, at the mention of an expensive gift, they were falling all over themselves to backtrack. "You're right, Dad, he is family. Which is why I'm not going to let you treat him like this." I turned and walked toward the door, ignoring their protests. The drive home was a blur. When I walked through our front door, James took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. We sat on our couch as I told him everything: the invitation, their excuses, their sudden change of heart when they learned about the Maldives trip. James listened quietly, his face calm as always, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He'd spent months planning this surprise, genuinely excited about giving Rachel and Mark this gift, and they couldn't even be bothered to invite him to the wedding. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "Cancel the trip," I said without hesitation. "And I'm not going to the wedding. I can't sit there and celebrate with people who treat you like this." "Are you sure? They're your family." I shook my head firmly. "You're my family. And I won't let anyone treat my family like this." James nodded, opened his laptop, and within minutes had cancelled the Maldives reservation. The money was immediately refunded to his account. As I watched the transaction complete, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. That evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First came the calls, Rachel's name flashing on my screen every few minutes, alternating with Mom and Dad's. I silenced them all. Then the messages started flooding in. "Please don't do this to me," Rachel texted. "The Maldives has always been my dream." "Sweetheart, let's talk about this rationally," Mom wrote. "Don't make any hasty decisions about the trip. Think about your sister's happiness," Dad chimed in. "This is her special day." As I scrolled through their messages, something became crystal clear. Not one of them mentioned James. Not one expressed regret for trying to exclude him from the wedding. Not one acknowledged how hurtful their actions had been. Every single message focused on one thing: the cancelled honeymoon. "You can't cancel the Maldives trip," Rachel's next message read. "We already told Mark's parents about it." I felt a cold laugh escape my throat. Of course they had. They'd probably started bragging about their luxury honeymoon the moment I left the house. "The trip is already cancelled," I typed back. "The money has been refunded. Don't contact me again." Then I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I blocked my sister's number. And my parents' numbers too, for good measure. James and I spent the rest of the evening watching movies on the couch, trying to pretend everything was normal. But the next morning, our peaceful Saturday was shattered by loud banging on our front door. Before we could even respond, the door burst open. My parents must have used their emergency key, the one I'd given them years ago for actual emergencies. Rachel stormed in first, followed by Mom and Dad. They didn't bother with hellos or explanations. "How dare you cancel our honeymoon?" Rachel screamed, her face red with anger. "You have to reinstate it right now." "Calm down," James said, standing up from the couch. "You can't just burst into our house like this." They ignored him completely, as if he wasn't even there. "Do you know how embarrassing this is?" Mom demanded. "After we already told everyone about the Maldives?" "Fix this right now," Dad ordered, pointing his finger at me. "Call whoever you need to call. We want the trip reinstated immediately." I stood my ground, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "I'm not giving expensive gifts to people who don't respect my husband or me. The trip is cancelled, and that's final." Rachel's face contorted with rage. "You know what? Don't bother coming to my wedding at all. You're not invited anymore. I don't want you there." "Rachel," James started to say, but she cut him off. "Shut up, this is all your fault. Ever since Amber married you, she's changed. She used to be fun, she used to be normal." I took a deep breath, my voice coming out surprisingly steady. "You want to talk about money? Fine. Let's talk about the $10,000 I gave you for this wedding." Rachel's face went pale so quickly, I thought she might faint. Mom and Dad stopped their angry muttering. "That's right," I continued. $10,000 that I could legally demand back right now, since you've uninvited me from the wedding. That's how gifts work, Rachel. They can be rescinded if the occasion they're meant for no longer applies to the gift giver." You wouldn't," Rachel stammered, her previous bravado completely gone. "No, I wouldn't," I agreed. "You can keep the money. Consider it your wedding gift from your horrible, unfun sister who doesn't want to come to your wedding anyway." "But the Maldives," Rachel's voice cracked. The Maldives was never yours to begin with, I said firmly. It was a surprise gift from the man you couldn't even be bothered to invite to your wedding. The man you've all treated like an outsider for years. Well, congratulations, you've finally succeeded in pushing us both away completely. Rachel's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. But I'd dreamed about the Maldives my whole life. It's not fair. Mom and Dad immediately wrapped their arms around her, like they always had when we were kids, and she didn't get her way. They shot me venomous looks as they guided her toward the door. I watched them leave, coddling my sobbing sister between them, and felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just exhaustion. The door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the house was quiet again. James came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. I'm so tired, I whispered. Tired of their arrogance, tired of them only thinking about themselves, tired of them treating us, like this. I know, he said softly, kissing the top of my head. I turned to face him, a small smile forming on my lips, despite everything. You know what? Let's do something with that refunded money. Something for us. What did you have in mind? We've been talking about getting a new car. $20,000 would make a nice down payment. James grinned. I might have been looking at some options already. Want to go car shopping? 2 weeks later, we were driving home in our brand new hybrid SUV. It was beautiful, practical, and most importantly, it was ours, a symbol of our life together, our priorities, our future. As I ran my hand over the pristine dashboard, I couldn't help but feel we'd made the right choice. The day of Rachel's wedding came and went. I spent it deliberately busy. James and I took our new car for a long drive along the coast, had lunch at a quiet seaside restaurant, and tried our best not to think about what was happening back in town. But that evening, after we returned home, I couldn't help myself. I opened Instagram and went to Rachel's page. The wedding photos were already up, professionally shot, carefully filtered, perfectly posed. But as I scrolled through them, I noticed something. Rachel's smile never quite reached her eyes. In every photo, even the candid shots, she looked distracted. Unsettled. Like someone trying too hard to prove they're having the time of their life. 2 days later, my Aunt Susan called. She'd always been my favorite relative, Mom's younger sister, but completely different from her in every way that mattered. I need to tell you something about the wedding, she said, her voice serious. Your mother made a speech. One of those passive-aggressive masterpieces she's so good at. She went on about how families should stick together, how some people become too caught up in their own lives to remember their responsibilities. Then she said something about greed destroying family bonds. I felt my chest tighten. Let me guess, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. Oh, honey, it was about as subtle as a brick through a window. The whole room was uncomfortable. Even some of Mark's family were whispering, asking what was going on. I took a deep breath and told her everything, the uninvited husband, the Maldives trip, Rachel's tantrum, all of it. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. You did the right thing, she said finally, her voice firm. I've watched for years as they've treated James like an outsider. It's not right, and it's not your fault. Your mother and Rachel, they've always been like this, always had to have everything their way. Tears welled up in my eyes. Thank you, Aunt Susan. You don't know how much that means to me. After we hung up, I sat in our backyard for a long time, watching the sunset. James found me there and brought out 2 glasses of wine. Penny for your thoughts? He asked, settling into the chair beside me. I was just thinking about family, I said, taking a sip. About how sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. Do you think you'll ever reconcile with them? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe someday, if they can truly understand what they did wrong and make real changes. But I'm not holding my breath, and I'm not going to chase after them. James reached over and took my hand. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. I squeezed his hand back, thinking about how far we'd come. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what really matters, who really has your back. My family might have thought James was the outsider, the one who didn't fit in, but they were wrong. He was the one who had shown true family values, loyalty, respect, understanding. As we sat there in our backyard, watching the sky turn from orange to purple, to deep blue, I felt a profound sense of contentment. Our new car sat in the driveway, a symbol of our shared future. Our home, though quieter now without my family's constant drama, felt more peaceful than ever.